welcome to another episode of Mean Brews. Today we're going to cover the Belgian beer style of Bière de Garde. This is actually a style that covers three different varieties: the blonde, the amber or ambré, and the brune or brown. Let's dive right into the style. I have 15 award-winning Bière de Garde recipes that I've found through the internet and through you, the viewers, who have sent me your recipes. There are 6 blonde recipes, 5 amber, and 4 brune or brown recipes. This is BJCP style 24C, a fairly strong, malt-accentuated, lagered artisanal beer with a range of malt flavors appropriate for the color. All are malty yet dry with clean flavors and a smooth character. This is a unique beer. It's Belgian. It's like a Saison, which is why you have the wide range of colors and flavors. However, it is lagered, and some say that it should have almost a musty, oxidized flavor. However, there is an argument that these flavors are really off flavors that are produced through improper storage, and therefore the styles that we see in the United States shouldn't have these flavors associated with them. But they are known, and they are written within the BJCP guidelines that they can have these flavors, and it's not an off flavor. Through my review of the styles, I've found that this is a recipe that's not really evolving. I've seen no change over time between really anything in this style. However, because there are 3 different subsets, there is a huge amount of style variation between the 3. When you look at the original gravities, I'm plotting all 3 on here. The color of the curve is matching the color of the style. We'll start with the blonde. It's an average of 1.072 original gravity. The amber style is 1.068, and the brune is 1.074. They're all within the range. The blonde had the biggest range from over here at 1.055 to 1.085. The others were pretty tightly bound between what you see here in these curves. IBUs told a little bit of a different story. Average IBUs for the blonde was 19.8, and it was very, very tightly bound here between 19 and 20.5 IBUs. The amber style had a mean of 23.9, a little bit broader range, and the brune had the biggest range between 19 and 29 IBUs, but right there on the BJCP average of 22.6 was the mean. Color is as you'd expect. The blonde was right at 5.8, sneaking outside the BJCP range a little bit. The amber was 9.7, and the brune was about 16. With regards to the malt bills, a couple things we should note here. Base malts from blonde to brune, as you'd expect with the more specialty malts to get more color, you're going to see a decrease in the base malts from 89% for the blonde, 84% for the amber, and 83% for the brune. Where we saw a big change was along the crystal malts. The blonde style had about 2.3% crystal. This almost doubled, or more than doubled, for the amber at 4.8, and then doubled again for the brune at 8.6. What I found interesting in this was the toast malts. Toasted malts seem to be a bigger proportion of the amber style, a big proportion of the blonde, and a much lesser proportion of the brune. I think you're looking for a more toasty flavored styles in the blonde and amber. There were 2 recipes that used almost 100% base malts of Vienna malt, looking for that toasted character. And I think for the brune style, they're going for more sweet, crystal type flavors. Last is the roast and the adjuncts. Only the brune used roast, and in very small proportion. These were debittered malts that they used, and we'll get into that later, but just for color, I think, were the roast used. And then adjuncts were the same for blonde and amber at 4.1% and 6.7% for the brune. For the blonde style, there were 4 highly used base malts for this style. The most commonly used was Belgian Pilsner. 83% of the recipes used Belgian Pilsner, almost all of them, at around 83% of the grist. Small little range here of amount of Pilsner. Vienna was the second most. 2 recipes used Vienna, and you can see an average rate of 51%. So there's one here at this and one here at this end of the range. This is what I was telling you about, the toasted malts. One of the recipes using 97% Vienna as its base. Belgian Pale and Munich malts were used in 2 recipes each, and they're right there at 3.7% of the grist, so not a big proportion of the grist for either of these malts. For the Ambler style, there were 3 recipes that were used in 50% of the recipes, or three grains that were used in 50% of the recipes: Belgian Pilsner, Belgian Pale, and Munich. Belgian Pilsner was used in an average of about 60% of the grist. The Belgian Pale was used in 41% of the grist, and the Munich was used for 20% of the grist. Two other grains were used as base malts: wheat and Vienna, in 1 recipe each, 17% of the grist. 89% of the grist, 17% of the recipes for the Vienna malt, and for the wheat malt, only 5% of the grist. Again, only 1 recipe each used these malts, so I wouldn't recommend using these for your recipe. For the Brune, Belgian Pils was the clear standout here. 100% of the recipes used Belgian Pilsner malt, at an average rate of 63% of the grist. Munich was next. 75% of the recipes used Munich, at an average of 9.8% of the grist. Next was Vienna. 2 out of 4 recipes used Vienna, at an average of 18.7% of the grist, and 1 recipe used wheat. But I wouldn't use that here based upon this. For the Blond Style, the crystal and toast malts, honey, aromatic, and biscuit were all used in half the recipes in some proportion, showing how the toast is very important for this style. 50% of the recipes used almost all of the recipes used a aromatic or a toasted malt in their malt bill, selecting between these 3, and also melanoidin, which is this one down here. Honey malt was 2.9% of the grist if it was used. I think this is aromatic, 2.8, and biscuit, 2.3. It should be noted that most recipes used about two of these, a combination of 2 toasted malts, or a toasted malt and a crystal malt. The only crystal malt really used in a large proportion was light crystal. 33% of the recipes used a light crystal, at an average rate of 5.4% of the grist. Like I said, most recipes use 2 toasted malts, or a toasted malt and a crystal malt, to make their malt bill a little bit more complex. For the Ambler style, toast and crystal malts, 75% of the recipes used a biscuit malt, at an average rate of 5.1% of the grist, and 50% of the recipes used a medium crystal or Care Munich, at an average rate of 4.5% of the grist. There were some other crystals and toasted malts down here used in one-offs. I think if you stick with these 2, you'll be close to the style, and you'll see that reflected in my recipe at the end. For the brown style, medium crystal was used in 75% of the recipes, at an average rate of 8.1% of the grist. You're seeing the crystal really bump up twice what it was in the other 2 styles. For the toast and roast malts on the Brune, you're really separated into 2 distinct styles here. There's Black Prince, or the bitter black malt, was used in less than 1% of the grist in 2 different beers, really just to get the color. And then the toast malts were aromatic, honey, or biscuit malts, somewhere between 2 and 3% of the grist. Not as much as what you've seen in the other 2 substyles. For the adjuncts, on the blonde style, clear candy sugar, 50% of the recipes use clear candy sugar, and some other recipes use some flaked in a small proportion, less than 6%. Candy sugar was used at about 4.4% of the grist, the average. Amber malt incidence for the adjuncts. Again, one-off recipes, 2 used flaked and 1 used a candy sugar here. somewhere between 3 and 7% of the grist. You'll see I'm going to use the candy sugar in mine just to get some color and for the amber style. I will have 3 recipes at the end, so you'll get to see all 3. The adjuncts in the brune, all of them were simple sugars. I had to dash one because there were 2 that were lined up right on top of one another. A big range here from 2 to 14%. Mostly colored sugars, brown, turbinado, or amber, not the clear kind. So they're trying to get that additional color bump in their final color of their beer. So I'm definitely going to recommend using a simple sugar in your brewing recipe if that's where you want to go with this. I'm not going to separate out the bittering hops for the substyles. Didn't see a lot of differentiation there, so I just grouped them all together. The most common bittering hop was Northern Brewer, followed by Styrian Goldings, and then a whole slew of other commonly European continental styles, or we do have a Fuggles and a Mount Hood, but mostly European continental style hops from Germany or Belgium were used for bittering hops here, which is the style. Flavor hops, 57% of the recipes used a flavor hop, and the most common was Howler, and then Fuggles and Tet, and some other European style hops as well for flavor. Aroma hops, Sots was number 1. 21% of the hop additions for aroma were Sots. Styrian Goldings, Mount Hood, Howler, Willamette, and Hersbrucker made up the rest. Only 50% of the recipes used aroma hops, so you won't see that as commonly used as the flavor bittering hop additions. The rate of hops that were used, again, 57% of the recipes used flavor hops. The average rate was 0.22 ounce per gallon. And 50% of the recipes, again, used aroma hops at an average rate of 0.12 ounce per gallon. So not a big contribution that you see in some of the other styles that I've covered previously. Yeasts. So I've separated out the yeast for the 3 different styles. The big winner for the blonde is WLP 550, a Choff. This is the Belgian pale strain. Again, also 540, which is Roquefort, was up there with 33%. 2/3 of the recipes either use one of these 2 yeasts. Amber kind of deviated a little bit. We have a Saison strain, 2 Saison strains, the Duvel strain, and actually a lager strain. We'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about fermentation temperatures. No real clear-cut winner here. Just go for what you're trying to do. I'll show how you can control that with fermentation temperature later on. For the brown, European ale and an alt strain was kind of shows how people were going more on the clean side, less phenolic positive yeast for the brewing style, trying to showcase those specialty malts that are being used. I think one recipe used Duvel and another used a Saison strain. I can't say that, Blages. So really interesting yeast selection, kind of fits with what you're trying to do with the style. And some people are having success with doing different things for the different 3 different subsets. 70% of the recipes were single infusion mash, so I'm going to recommend that. 30% used the step mash. For the mash rest, you can see there was a couple recipes that used a beta-glucanase rest. All of them used an alpha amylase, and there's 2 that used the beta amylase rest as well. I'm not going to recommend doing a step mash for this style. I don't think that it's pertinent unless you have a lot of adjuncts. If you end up putting flaked in there, you might want to do some step mash. But for the alpha rest, 152F for 60 minutes was the average. The boil duration, this is kind of interesting. The average was 83 minutes. What we saw in the data, and I haven't shown it here, was the blonde and the amber styles kind of followed this curve, and the brune styles kind of deviated towards the longer boils, probably to develop the more caramel flavors that you want in that sub-style. Pick your boil duration based upon your style. If you're going to brew a blonde, a 60-minute boil is going to be fine. If you're going to do a brune, you might want to do a 2-hour boil. Fermentation temperature, this is where it gets interesting. The average was 65.9 degrees Fahrenheit. The alt strains went very clean at 60. And remember, the alt strains were used for the brewing. So really looking for those clean lager-like ester profiles. Also saw the lager strain fermented very warm. So they're taking a clean lager yeast and trying to have it produce esters. Remember, with this style, it's like a subdued Saison. It's a Saison that has some phenolic character, some ester character, but it's less upfront in your face like the Saison is. So you can kind of see what people are trying to do here. Also, all the Belgian strains, the Saison strains, and the the phenolic positive strains from Duvel and others. I think this is pretty low for a Belgian strain. So they're trying to subdue those esters by fermenting it cooler than you normally would. Really shows some of the tactics that people have taken to try to produce a style that's subdued in its phenols and in its esters. Really interesting to see that a lager was used at a higher temperature just to try to push it and have it produce some of those esters. There are only 3 or 4 recipes that gave carbonation volumes, and it was right at 2.35 average. So we're going to shoot for that for this style. All right, on to my suggested recipe. Here's for the blonde. We're going to start with 89% Belgian two-row, Belgian Pilsner. And then we're going to use a split of 2 toast malts, aromatic and biscuit at about 2.4% each. I'm going to use Caravine malt at 2.3%. That's my crystal malt. And then 4% clear candy sugar. I'm going to bitter with 15 IBUs of Styrian Goldings. I'm going to add 0.14 ounces per gallon of Fuggle at 15 minutes. And then 0.09 ounce per gallon of Sats at flame out. And I'm going to use the Belgian Pale WLP 5. I think this was a Choff for this style. For the numbers, I'm going to shoot for 1.072 and 19 IBUs. Only one recipe's reported water chemistry, so you pick your favorite water chemistry. I wouldn't go for something dry. I'd go for something balanced or more malt forward, so more chlorides over the sulfates for all of these styles. This isn't a hoppy beer. This is a beer you want to showcase either the yeast products or the malt flavor characteristics of the style. So hold back on the gypsum additions. I'm going to infusion mash at 152 for 60 minutes. I'm going to sparge as usual and boil for 60 minutes. Chill to 66, oxygenate and pitch. And I'm going to ferment at that temperature. As the fermentation slows, I'm going to ramp it up a little bit just to clean up the fermentation, make sure I don't have any diacetyl or acetaldehyde, however you say that. Cold crash and lager for 1 month at 34°C. These are all lagered styles, so it needs to be lagered. And then I'm going to keg or bottle to about 2.4 volumes. For the amber style, a little bit more simple malt bill, 84% Belgian Pilsner, 2.3% biscuit malt, or it's 7.3% biscuit malt, sorry. Cara Munich, 4.8%, and amber candy sugar, 4.1%. I'm going to bitter with Styrian Goldings at 23.2 IBUs. And then I'm going to add Sats at flame out at 0.15 ounce per gallon or 1.12 grams per liter. And I'm going to use the Duvel strain, White Labs 570. I really like that strain, and I think that will suit this malt bill pretty well. As for the numbers, 1.068 and 23.2 IBUs. Again, with the water chemistry, follow the guidance that I just gave you on the blonde. I'm going to infusion mash the same as I did the blonde. No changes there. Sparge the same. Ferment the same. Everything else is the same. For the brown style, I'm going to start with 71.1% Belgian Pilsner, and I'm going to supplement that with about 12% Belgian Munich malt. If you can't find Belgian Munich malt, I recommend using the Weyermann's Munich 1. It's a good substitute for that. This is a light colored Munich. For my crystal malts, I'm going to use 8.6% Cara Munich If you use the Weirmans, I always try to use the Karamunic 2, just in the middle range of the 1, 2, and 3. I think that's, according to my taste, that's my favorite one. For the biscuit malt, 1.7%, so a little bit of toast malt. And then again, amber candy sugar at 6.7% of the grist. I'm going to add about 12 IBUs of Northern Brewer. Not a lot of IBUs there. And then a big shot of Howler there at the end at 15-minute boils at 0.32 ounce per gallon. This had a pretty high hop rate there at the end. So I'm getting a lot of IBUs at the end. I'm going to try to use this White Lab 011 if you can find it. If not, use an alt strain or a cold strain, something clean. You could also use one of the phenolic strains that was used quite often, but I'm trying to go a different route here on the Brune than the other two styles. Original gravity 1.074, 21.4 IBUs, and I think everything else is pretty much the same. Yeah. All right, so that's the end of the presentation. We're now going to pick the next style. Let's bring this on over. Whoops. And we randomizing German Pilsner. Excellent. Well, thanks for tuning in once again. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Sorry it took so long. I lost my camera, but really enjoyed doing this style. It's one of the more complex ones. It's 3 beers in one. So next one's going to be a great German Pilsner. I really enjoy the German Pilsner style, and I enjoy brewing it and drinking it. So tune in next week, and we'll cover German Pilsner. Bye-bye. This episode is brought to you by the Master Homebrewer Program. Earn awards and badges based upon how you score in homebrewing competitions across the world. Sign up now at cialers.org.